Nadia, just letting you know, we're just waiting a few minutes for people to come in and whatever. So we'll be about 5 minutes. Are you ready, sir? Nadia, are you ready? Okay. Welcome. My name is Brian Levine, and I serve as the student body governor of Florida International University's Biscayne Bay campus. On behalf of student body president Alexander Robito, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third lecture in the Student Government Association's Environmental Resilience lecture series. Today's lecture is for a very interesting topic, and I think many of you are going to enjoy it. It's called Fish in the Street and Rivers in the Concrete, Stories of Climate Migration in Miami. Today's speaker is Nadia Sitaram. Nadia Sitaram is a PhD candidate in the Earth and Environment Department at Florida International University. Her research seeks to understand how differences in the exposure and vulnerability to sea level rise over time influences climate mobility outcomes for residents across Miami-Dade County, Florida. Sitaram graduated from Fordham University in 2012 with a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Policy and Psychology, and then from Florida International University in 2014 with a Master's in Science in Environmental Studies. She's held research positions at the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery in New York and at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's National Exposure Research Lab in Athens, Georgia. Her previous work focused on monetary valuation of ecosystem services and the relation to the restoration of Florida Everglades. She was a co-chair of the Comic SciCon Miami franchise and helped organize the first ever Comic SciCon in the state of Florida in 2019. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Nadia Sitaram. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that lovely introduction. Can everyone hear me well? I hope. Well, it's so great to be with you all, and thanks so much for coming. Thank you so much, SJ, for even inviting me to share a little bit about my research. So just to add a little bit more to that introduction, I would consider myself so yes, I've graduated from FIU before, and I'm back here now to finish my PhD. I held some positions in government, but along the way, I started to identify as a climate adaptation scientist. And if you've never heard anyone say that before, it's because it's really in a new and emerging field, and it's emerged because we have this need to adapt to climate change. And so that's really what I study at this point. How are we adapting to climate change? How is society being impacted by the effects of climate change? What should our policy look like? How does our infrastructure need to change? What types of transformations do we need to make societal, at a societal level to kind of meet the needs that climate change will sort of impose upon us? And so I'm going to share a little bit of the work that I've been doing in Miami, really focused on migration, really focused on this idea of if people will want to live in Miami, considering some of the, the flood risks. Also, there's heat impacts as sort of climate change progresses. But I'll just get to it. So in okay, so to state something that I think is pretty obvious to anyone who lives in Miami, anyone who lives in South Florida, sea levels are rising, and we need no further evidence than really just kind of looking outside our windows on some days. I mean, right now at this particular time in Miami, I'm actually not joining you from Miami today, but I do remember exactly what it's like driving through rainy storms and flooding. And at the moment, there's this sort of king tide season that we're sort of experiencing as well. So combined with rainy, the rainfall every day, it really makes for some flooded streets. And so the one thing that, that I think is really quite apparent from my work now in current day versus when I was a master's student is that the impacts of climate change, people are really starting to see them and really becoming concerned as a result. And it's apparent in pretty much all of the headlines that we see in all the headlines we see coming out of South Florida. Now, these headlines I stole from 2019. I didn't even really bother updating them because these questions are still very much ongoing. Is climate change prompting gentrification of certain areas, certain high elevation areas across Miami? Do people want to retreat? How are they dealing with flooding? Do people want buyouts? Are they leaving on their own accord? These were all the questions that really inspired my research. And so I'd love to try to make this as interactive as possible. And so if you could go to follow the instructions at the top of the screen where it says go to www.menti.com, and you use, you'll be prompted to, there should be a link that says join this presentation. And if you use the code at the top, you should be able to answer this question. I'd really love to know, what do you think the main causes of sea level rise are? And so again, you just go to menti.com. There's a link that says join presentation. You enter the code and you should see that same question and a box where you can sort of type that answer in. And if everything works well, it should be up on the screen. Perfect. Climate change, yes. Yep. Great, wonderful. Well, yeah, absolutely. Okay, just give you a couple more seconds there. But so far, everyone is right on the mark with climate change being the largest contributor, but this person over in the corner who mentioned melting ice caps, rising sea levels, that's, I think, maybe more the level of specificity that I was sort of going for here. So technically, the three main causes of sea level rise are the melting of ice sheets that you see here, the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. Those are the ones that we're really concerned about. Those are the ones that they become really destabilized throughout the course of the century, will really cause a problem for coastal cities across the world. Then there's also ice melting from land sources, so snow caps. This is the Himalayas, and you can see that there's actually a lot of water stored in these mountains. And so when that ice also melts, that's also causing, and it filters down through rivers and all that, it also causes sea levels to rise as well. And finally, the last one is you'll see a picture of water. It's the thermal expansion of water. So in addition to, rising, ice melting as a result of global warming, the water in our oceans is actually just warmer because the oceans are absorbing so much energy that we're throwing out into the atmosphere. And when water gets hot, it expands. So for the most part, it's the melting of different types of ice across our planet and also the thermal expansion of water that's rising, that's causing our sea levels to rise. But everybody is ultimately correct who said climate change, because it is ultimately our dependence excuse me, on our fossil fuel economy, this extractive economy that really, in our, just excuse me one moment, I've got something in my, thank you. It's our dependent on fossil fuels that that releases heat trapping gases like carbon dioxide and methane that warm our atmosphere. And it's the way that we fueled our economy over the past 150, 200 years, really since the mark of the Industrial Revolution. Essentially, all of that extraction, all of that excess CO2, all of that excess methane, it gets stored and it kind of hijacks our planet's greenhouse effect. Now, I want to make really clear that we absolutely need the greenhouse effect on this planet to survive. We wouldn't be warm without it, and we wouldn't be able to, sort of live and sustain life without it. But what the greenhouse effect does is that, it actually traps. It traps heat within our atmosphere. The problem is, since we've essentially poured so much of this, these gases that remain in our atmosphere for so long, that's carbon dioxide, that methane, it's made the temperature, it's now keeping too much of those gases in our atmosphere, and the temperature is rising, and that is global warming. And that warming globally, and at this point, the latest science says that we have risen about 1 whole degree Celsius. That's what's causing climatic change. And so I think if you go back to, that same web page that you used, yeah, perfect. You should be able to vote on this question. I'm really curious to know, are you concerned about sea level rise? Whoa, okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, so this is very consistent with, the way that I think people are sort of thinking about this now. I wonder if this question, if we had asked it maybe 10 years ago, how it would have been different. But across the board, across Miami, across the political spectrum, people are very concerned about sea level rise. And again, it's because we're able to see its impacts on a daily basis right now. And so what does that mean for Miami? What does that mean for South Florida? So what you're looking at here is what we call the Unified Sea Level Rise Projections. And this is put together by the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact. And essentially it's the 4 counties in Southeast Florida, I should say, Palm Beach, Monroe, Miami, and Broward. They decided that they wanted to plan for sea level rise, excuse me, as a region. And so they needed to kind of figure out a way, well, how are we going to plan for it? Like, what kind of projections are we going to go by? And this is what they came up with, these 4 separate projections. Now this, what you're seeing on the screen, is the great challenge of sea level rise. At any point, depending on our actions today, that can really determine the amount of sea level rise that we see at the end of the century. You'll notice that this graph starts in 2020, where we are, and it goes all the way beyond the end of the century into the earlier parts of next century. But it diverges at many points, and decision makers, politicians, people who are planning at this point, they have to figure out what trajectory are we going to plan for? Because sea level rise, not only is it affecting us today, but it will affect us in 2030. It will affect us in 2070 at the end of the century and beyond. And all of us are pretty young, so we're likely to see a lot of these impacts. In my work, I tend to use this projection scenario, this NOAA high value, but I know professors at FIU who are using this extreme value, and it's really quite scary, this extreme value. But these numbers are actually in are in inches, so they're not feet or anything like that. Yeah, so I know professors at FIU who are using this value, and the reason that they're doing it is because they're not seeing any significant effort internationally to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce those heat trapping gases. The best adaptation is by far mitigation. It is reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, reducing our how much CO2, how much methane goes into our atmosphere. That'll severely limit the types of impacts we'll see towards the end of the century. Because I want to make this very clear. At this point, we have very much committed to a different future for Miami. The question is, how severe will these impacts be? And a lot of that depends on what we do right now. And again, flooding, not a problem for 2030, not a problem for 2040. These are very familiar pictures across Miami, across South Florida. These just daily rainfalls, tidal flooding, all of this is stuff that we can see just in our everyday, and especially I think during this particular time period. So because I knew this, and because there were headlines and people are planning for sea level rise, I really wanted to know. And it didn't seem like there had been a lot of ongoing work about flooding and how it's affecting people across Miami. I really wanted to know, how were people thinking about flooding? Do they want to leave? Are they seeing the realities of flooding and deciding that they might want to go now, sometime in the future? Are they adapting? Are they wanting to adapt further? just in general, what were people thinking? Because there were plans that are being put forth during this time, but they didn't seem to really ask anyone what they thought about these plans or how they really view some of, these different flood risks. And so I conducted earlier this year a series of 40 interviews. I really wanted to kind of just start small and get a sense of how people across Miami were thinking about these issues. And so these are the demographics of the 40 people that I identified. That I was able to interview. Again, this is like peak pandemic, and I had to do all of this online, so it was actually really difficult to get 40 people to participate. But we have sort of almost an even split between Black and white participants. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get as many Hispanic and Latinx participants in the interviews, but we do have an even split between renters and owners. We have a massive age range from the youngest being 19 years old to 76 years of age. And in terms of median income, the majority of our participants were actually making around or under the county median income. The county median, Miami-Dade County's median income is around $52,000 a year. And we do also have some high income earners as well. But this is the distribution of the participants and where they were and across Miami. And again, I was really trying to get as much of a diverse group of people. I didn't really want it concentrated in Miami Beach or in Brickell. Well, no one really participated from Brickell, but you can see that there are a lot of people, living inland as far south as Florida City and as far north as Miami Gardens. But in terms of municipality, most people were in the city of Miami. So before I get into, some of the things that I found throughout this interview, I'd really love you to rank, which source of flooding do you experience the most? Which is the one that impacts you? It doesn't have to be daily, but I guess most frequently, I would say. And you should be able to rank them. Interesting. Yeah, so these results, align very much with what I was sort of uncovering across the county as well. And it's so interesting to me because when I think about all the times I have waded through actual rivers in the street, actual rivers of concrete, it's always been because of rain. It's never been because of a hurricane. I have been through some tidal flooding when I lived a little bit closer to the Shorecrest area. But for the most part, it's always been rain. And this is something that I think is going really overlooked in our planning at the moment. I mean, our planning is really thinking about the long term, but the right now problem is rain. And that's pretty much exactly what the participants of this study said. So of the 40 participants, 23 of them identified, having some kind of flooding related problem with rain. A few more people also mentioned tropical storms, hurricanes. Some people mentioned being impacted by both rain related and hurricanes. Tidal, really not too many people sort of mentioning that, but again, it makes a little bit more sense because that's really more of a particularly coastal issue, and there weren't so many people in the interview set that were living on the coast. So I have this green arrow pointed here because 3 people in all of the 40 mentioned that they've been impacted by both rain, tidal flooding, and hurricane related flooding. And I don't know if this is by coincidence or maybe this is something that warrants further investigation. But all 3 of these people also mentioned seeing fish in the street. And so it brings us to this question of, are people seeing fish in the street? And, this headline, I remember seeing it a while back, did a Miami man really catch a fish in South Beach? And it also reminds me of this octopus. If you guys recall this famous scene when I'm not sure if this was a hurricane or not, but I do remember seeing this, and I do remember seeing this everywhere. But what's interesting enough, both of these pictures were taken in Miami Beach. But the people who mentioned seeing fish in the street in some form or another, they were from Doral, Miami Gardens, Shorecrest, these areas of Miami that you don't necessarily think of having such a high flooding prevalence, right? So from Doral, the participant, the resident from Doral, he said, most recently, like 1 year ago, there was a full moon, there was a high tide, and it just rained, and the water flowed down the blocks, flowed down the streets for blocks and blocks and blocks. I even took video because it was crazy. I had to park my car somewhere else. I had to call out of work because it didn't drain the next morning. It stayed like that for over 48 hours. You could see like fish going through the streets of Doral Boulevard that had come up from the canals. This is a person who had to call out of work because there was no way for him to actually get to work without risking completely, damaging his car. From Miami Gardens, this person mentioned, again, especially with the tidal flooding, especially in the king tides, it comes up to the wall. It rises up to my wall. However, unless it rains with that, then it's coming over my wall. So I asked if he'd ever seen, this person lives on a canal and has a seawall in the back of his home. So I asked if the water in the canal ever rises over his wall, and he said, oh yeah, so I have fish in there. You could see the little fish swimming in the pond on the grass, and it's sitting on the grass. It's freaky and weird. And yeah, I mean, fish being on land, I mean, it's just something's just inherently wrong about that. They should be, in the aquatic ecosystem that they deserve to be in. And then from Shorecrest, this last participant mentioned that after Hurricane Irma, she saw dead fish everywhere that had sort of either blown in or, the water had receded and the fish were left stranded here. And the reason that I bring this up is because, one, we're in 2021. These are some real, I don't know, there's something about, fish being in the street that's just so alarming. I think it's a little bit destabilizing because they're not supposed to be there, right? They're supposed to be in water. It's like the water is now coming to the land and it's stranding these animals that should be somewhere else. And for me, there's something really just alarming about encountering that. And another thing that I think we have to really remember about Miami is that a lot of these rain-related, problems are also problems of, well, one, they're problems of drainage. With a lot of Miami-Dade County, the current stormwater infrastructure is really gravity-based. And so what that means is as the sea levels rise, if it's sort of gravity-based and there's water on this side, the water can't necessarily drain out, so it kind of blocks up the street. But also our entire geologic foundation essentially kind of makes it so that some of the strategies that we might use to adapt, they won't work here. For example, our foundation is limestone. And so what that means, it's very porous. It's actually just fossilized coral because Miami-Dade was really one giant, coral reef 125,000 years ago. And then when the sea levels receded, now we have the land that we call Miami. And so as a result, because of that porous limestone, water will come up and underneath. So if you put a seawall there in another place, it might actually block out the water, but it won't happen here in Florida. And that also really contributes to some of our flooding related problems. Okay, so another question. I want you to think about your absolute worst experience in flooding in Miami, just probably the worst one you've ever had. And if you can, try to remember or try to estimate what depth that water was. Was it at your ankles? Was it somewhere between your ankle and knee? Somewhere between your knee and waist, your waist or your head? Was it, I doubt anyone has overhead, but just kind of try to, place that level of flooding. Cool. Yeah, I would say for myself, it would also be around ankle to knee. I was actually in my car, so I don't know, but it was deep enough that I definitely thought I totaled my entire car. Absolutely. Okay, and so the reason I asked you to do this is because I've been working with flood modelers at UC Irvine to develop a flood model essentially for Miami-Dade. And we're modeling two different types of things here. We're modeling the risk of what we call inundation. And an inundation is just when and at what point will the water take over the land? At what point where sea levels rise and the water will just sort of cover it. And well, really that's kind of it for the water until unless we figure out a way to sort of prevent it from coming in or block it out or something to that effect. So that's inundation. That's the long-term sea level rise issue. Then the other one is what we call an extreme event, basically like a hurricane, a huge episodic event that brings in a lot of water and causes a lot of flooding, at one time. So I'm going to show you our model for just the inundation, that long-term sea level rise effect. And what I really like about these flood modelers is they found a way to make this information really intuitive, because they essentially are figuring out what are the flood depths based on our body. And so what you see down here is this legend. This sort of lighter area here is no flood depth. This orange area is ankle depth. This darker orange, ankle knee. This purple or fuchsia-ish color is knee waist. And then this dark purple is waist head and black is overhead. And what you're looking at here is 1 meter of sea level rise. That's around 3 feet of sea level rise. And with this long-term inundation risk, if you kind of just like look at it just from afar, you'll see that most of Miami-Dade has pretty much no flooding. These areas around here, for the most part, I don't think anyone really lives out here. But if you look carefully at Miami Beach, that's where you'll see a lot of that flooding. So with around 3 feet of sea level rise, parts of Miami Beach on this side have some sort of ankle, knee, and ankle depth or ankle knee sort of flood water. And that's just sort of permanent unless we can figure out a way to, divert that water or something. Same thing as along some of the Miami River and some of the canals and some of the, more coastal areas. Now, with 2 meters, so let's just adding on another basically 3 feet. So this is about 6 feet of sea level rise. And this is a scenario that we do not anticipate happening, until potentially maybe at the end of the century. Again, if you think back to that, graph I showed you in the beginning, that chart, it's really hard for me to put a date on some of these things because it really depends on what we do now. That really shapes how much water we can expect. And so maybe in a very bad case scenario, this could be, the end of the century, but also potentially beyond. But what you see is a lot more flooding, pretty much most of the beaches at waist head, knee waist, same thing for Key Biscayne, pretty much all of the coastal areas in and around the canals as well. And a lot of the western areas of Miami too. You can see mostly that fuchsia, dark orange, and dark purple colors. And I mean, 3 meters, this is around 9, maybe 10 feet. This is beyond the end of the century. Yeah, not a very good scenario with very few, with not so much land sort of, making it out. And again, this would require just a massive transformation really for anyone to sort of live in this county at this point. But then let's kind of take a look at that. Remember I said that extreme event scenario, the hurricanes. This is no meters of sea level. This is baseline sea level rise. You can think of it as right now if you want to. And this is, again, an extreme event, potentially, pretty much more or less a hurricane. It comes in, it brings a lot of rain, it brings a lot of water into the area. Now, that being said, this doesn't look like the other pictures. You're actually seeing quite a lot of flooding, pretty much everywhere, except for very much, the highest points of elevation across the county, really in and around sort of these areas here. And that really gets to show you that there are actually quite a lot of vulnerabilities and there are higher levels of risk with something that is a bit more powerful and less long-term here. And this could be highly disruptive across the entire county. It doesn't change that much when you add sea level rise to it. You do see a bit more deepening in terms of those exact same areas. You see more of the beach, I think, sort of covered, and pretty much all of Key Biscayne as well. And so you're really just sort of, again, this is an extreme event. This is a lot of flooding on top of sea level rise. Same thing with 2 meters. And then 3 meters, you have a very flooded situation. So the reason I show you that is to kind of, you know, give you a sense of, you know, what could be, you know, what could be at different points, depending on, you know, what we do now. And I want to jump back to some of the responses of the participants and kind of, you know, again, bring it back to the fact that most people were talking about rain-related events and some hurricane-related events. And so we haven't even begun to model the day-to-day rainfall. And I mean, I think something that a really big benefit that comes out of this research is we might actually start doing that right now, because we've realized what a huge problem this is right now. And so all of these flooding effects that people have mentioned, street flooding causing traffic, you know, backing up commutes, neighborhood related flooding, people being flooded in their homes, car damage. 3 people mentioned, you know, 3 people out of 40 mentioned that their cars have been totaled by rainfall related events in Miami. I mean, that was a lot more than I thought. It's only 40 people. I didn't expect to find 3 people who had that issue. 5 people mentioned that they've been trapped in their homes for, you know, either a day or 2 because they had to wait to the water to recede in either a sort of a hurricane event or the tidal rain event. And so this is very much causing a problem right now. So how are people adapting? People mentioned all of these types of problems. What were people sort of doing in the meantime? For the most part, everyone found a different traffic route. Everyone or kind of just accepted a longer commute. People moved their cars to garages or elevation when they knew there was going to be a heavy rain. Some people just avoided places that they knew were going to flood. People often have to wait to flood out. And 3 people mentioned that they were thinking of purchasing SUVs at this point because they just didn't want to be caught in, you know, a rainstorm. So big question, who of the 40 decided that they wanted to leave Miami as a result of everything? Well, when I asked this question in the beginning, only 4 people said that sea level rise is a reason that they want to move. One of the reasons, it was never only the reason, and you'll find that in any of these decisions, sea level rise is almost never going to be the only reason that someone wants to move. But it was a primary factor for people wanting to move right now, just 4 people. And, you know, other people had mentioned that they wanted to move too, but those weren't, you know, sea level rise just wasn't a factor. Usually it was sort of, you know, housing, employment, some kind of situation related to that, why other people said that they wanted to move. But when I asked them to imagine, you know, the future where sea level rise impacts become more intense, about 30 people, or 75% of all the people who participated in the interviews said, yeah, they would consider moving from as a result of sea level rise in the future. And this was really surprising to me because what I kept hearing from the interviews over and over again was just how much people loved living in Miami. I mean, yeah, believe me, people complained. They complained about the traffic. They complained about, you know, how crowded it's kind of getting and the housing prices and all of this stuff. Of course, people complained about Miami. But those complaints were almost always followed by, if not, you know, preceded by how much they loved it here, the weather, the culture, the people, the vibrancy. And so the fact that, you know, 75% of people said that, yeah, if it gets worse, they might have to consider moving. That was really, really, really just an eye-opening moment, I think, for me. And so what were the types of things that people said would indicate to them that they might have to actually consider moving? What were people looking for that would kind of signal that sea level rise is now becoming such a huge problem that they would leave? And most people said it was a catastrophic hurricane. Again, that really, you know, jibes well with the sort of model results that we have. And also a lot of people recalled Andrew, you know, and so people kind of mentioned, you know, if another Andrew-like hurricane had happened, that they would probably want to leave. Some people just said they need to see more flooding. I wasn't really quite sure, you know, what they meant by that, but I guess they just mean more intense flooding, maybe it becoming a real nuisance in their daily life, more so than it is right now. People also mentioned structural integrity issues, if their homes were no longer safe, if they were told it was no longer safe to live in Miami. And a few people mentioned drinking water, basic needs. Another thing that I haven't really discussed, because I mostly focus on flood risk, is sea level rise is also accompanied by saltwater intrusion, and it actually contaminates our drinking water supply in Miami. And so people were really aware of that potential. And some people were thinking about economic signals, you know, insurance, mortgages, that sort of thing. So I wanted to kind of start closing and wrapping up this presentation by, you know, kind of getting you acquainted with a few of the people that I met throughout this process, a few of the people who, you know, told me their story, and kind of set for you, I guess, maybe the landscape of decisions that people are having to make right now. So I interviewed this gentleman from Coral Gables. He's a renter, he has a young family, he is looking to buy, he's very aware of sea level rise, the risk, and so elevation is a factor for him. But so is the price. And so even though he's renting in Coral Gables right now and would like to buy a home in Coral Gables or South Miami, an area of high elevation, he's aware that it's really, really expensive. And this is before, I think, you know, this was around the time where the housing costs, I mean, they've sort of really spiraled out of control in Miami also as a result of COVID. And so these interviews don't really capture that, because this was really early in the beginning of the year. I think it's kind of out of control. It's gotten more out of control over the summer. So I have no idea, you know, what he would say to that now, given, you know, the impacts of COVID as well. And so, you know, he talked about, yeah, really wanting to remain in Miami because this is the place where his family is. His wife's family is here. His family came here. Their children are growing up here. And so I kind of asked him, you know, knowing that you want to buy a home in Miami, knowing that you know about the risk, what could, you know, what could the city do? What could any city do, any politician do to sort of convince you to maybe stay in Miami as a potential homeowner? What would make you feel more safe? And he said, you know, they need to communicate, especially for first time home buyers and future home buyers. They need to communicate that, look, this is what we're doing and this is how we're planning and on attacking and arming ourselves for this. You know, this is how your house, your home, your family, and your life will be safe in this community. If they don't, people are going to keep leaving. And I think that was a really big theme that kind of stretched across a lot of interviews, where people want to feel safe. They want to feel reassured that their government is doing something to sort of help them stay in a place that they love. This one is from Key Biscayne. This is a person, she's an owner, she owns a condo, and she purchased this property last year. She is very aware of the risks of sea level rise, and she's mentioned flooding all across Key Biscayne in streets and parks, in the parking lot. And so for someone who, you know, kind of knows all the risks of sea level rise, it really struck me that she bought a home in Key Biscayne in this sort of high risk flood, you know, area. And so I kind of asked her what was her thought process behind that. And well, essentially she said that she essentially said that she would probably try to leave and sell the place within the next 5-10 years and enjoy what she can of, you know, the lifestyle in Key Biscayne, and hopefully try to sell before those risks are really internalized in the market. And so she said, I live so close to the ocean that it would affect the building, and I'd be nervous about living in the building. And financially, I'm trying to make sure I move out of the building before it becomes that acute of a problem. And so for me, this really raises this question of what are the moral, what are the ethics of this type of decision? Legally, she's very well able to do that and pass this risk on to another person, another family, another household. But ethically, I mean, there's a lot entwined. There's a lot that gets involved in a decision to buy a place for a lot of people. You know, it becomes an asset, it becomes part of their wealth, it becomes something that they want to sort of pass on. And when you know it's a sort of a risky sort of bet, but that risk isn't, you know, internalized in the marketplace, you know, it becomes kind of an ethically gray area, though definitely not a legal one. And for, you know, everyone who's sort of here, I just want to say that the state of Florida, when you buy a home, whoever's selling it to you, the realtor, anyone, they are not required to disclose the flood risk of that home, the history, its current risk, anything like that. So that's very much on you. So pass that information along. I don't know if how many people know that. But yeah, legally, they're not required to tell you that when you buy the home. And so you can very well get away with, you know, kind of passing risk on to someone else. From Allapattah. This is another homeowner. She's 76 years old. She lives in Allapattah because it's really convenient for her to get to her medical appointments using public transportation. She mentioned no flooding events at all, but she did mention that her property taxes, she's seen them rise over the past 3 years. And when I asked her if she was concerned about sea level rise, she said, not much, because like I said, I'm not in that area and I really have no intention of wanting to live. And what this particular case really really drives home for me is that, for a lot of people in Miami, they think that sea level rise is really just this problem that stays at the coastline. But what I really want to impress upon you is that when people on the coastline, when it is realized and internalized that this risk is too high, these are not good investments anymore, they very well come inland to these higher areas potentially and want to invest there. It's the more safer long-term option. And so when I think about, a 76-year-old who's living so close next to Buena Vista, and I think about what we know are going to be some of the impacts of sea level rise in those low-lying areas. She's living right now in an area that, if there are no adequate protections in place, she could very well be displaced from this area if she can no longer keep up with those rising property taxes or be able to sort of pass on this home to her own children. And finally, from East Little Havana, I interviewed a gentleman. He's a renter. He was a veteran. He's now a student. He lost a lot of his income due to COVID-19. He's experienced 2 big car-related incidents with regards to flooding. Once his car got totally totaled right outside his house because it just got flooded. He did mention that sea level rise is a reason that he wants to leave Miami, but he indicated that he might want to go to Broward. I don't focus my work on Broward County just because it's a little bit easier to focus on one county, but please be aware that there are a lot of flood risks also in Broward as well. This is not just a problem that ends at the Miami border. But he lost his car, I think, in Hurricane Irma. He had another flooding related incident that he's mentioned as well. He needs to sort of save up money so that he's able to move. And he really brings home for me, these questions of people who are very impacted but have fewer resources to move. How are they going to sort of fare? I mean, losing your car, depending on how well the insurance is able to pay for it, these can be some really big out-of-pocket costs for people with few resources. And so, but for the most part, we really focused on, how many times he has to change his route due to all the flooding that he experiences in his area. And he said frequently, pretty much every week, he has to decide, where does he want to go? Does he want to go towards the river or up 12th Ave? It's become a bit of a nuisance for him. And this is all stuff that is happening right now. And so the main takeaways from this are people are thinking about leaving Miami right now. And without adequate adaptation to flood risks, more people will leave. People are aware, they are concerned, they are looking for that reassurance that things are going to be done to keep them in their home. But in the meantime, while we sort of plan and model for long-term inundation and we plan and model for hurricanes, rainfall-related flooding is a huge nuisance right now and is causing problems right now. And so we really need to start thinking about these sort of right now issues as well. So I just want to pose, one final question to you. Feel free to share if you'd like to. But I'd really love to know, this topic is so loaded because it is, these are people's homes, these are people's lives. This is something that is real, it is ongoing. And at the moment, on a global scale, we're not really doing too much. Oh no, I don't want to make you scared. I do want to give you information to make you more informed. It is scary though, so I definitely understand that. The first time I ever saw those models myself, I really had to sit and and I struggled to really understand, what what it would really mean for the reality of Miami. And so I think that it is, if any action will take place unless it threatens the market more. Yeah, I mean, so much of what goes on in Miami is driven by the market. And not necessarily driven by concern for the everyday. And so there are a lot of people at FIU, at across, across their county that are really trying to highlight these. Why do people keep building at the beach? I have no idea at this point. I mean, there really should be a law against it, but Florida is a very a very pro-development state. And there's a reason for that as well, because a lot of the budgets from city and municipal governments, they are funded by property tax revenue. And so they need that money to continue providing services as a government. And so it is very scary. It is very, very, very concerning. One thing that I can sort of kind of close on is right now, as we speak, in Glasgow, there is a conference called COP26. It's the Conference of Parties. It's a big sort of international meeting of all the countries on how they're going to reduce emissions and if they're going to reduce them. I will say that, as someone who works in this field, I am also very, very, very concerned, very, very, very scared as well, because ultimately what they've pledged will not keep us to where we need to be. I mean, at this point, our global average temperature is around, it's already 1 degree higher than normal. They're trying to keep it at 1.5. I mean, if you look around us in this 1 degree warmer world, and you see all of the extreme events, not just flooding, wildfires, crazy floods, all kinds of things, that's just a 1 degree warmer world. What will 1.5 sort of look like? Unfortunately, a lot of the emissions, the pledges, all of the things that they're making are actually kind of going to keep us around 2.5 and 3 degrees Celsius. That is a much drastically warmer world. And that is not a world that we really, want to be living on. And that's really my closing thought here. This is totally our future. Like mine, yours, I assume, most people who are listening to this talk right now, we're probably going to be alive in the next 60, 80 years, maybe, I don't know, but we're going to be in this for the long haul. And what these politicians and what these people are sort of, doing when they make these commitments that they don't follow through on, they're discounting our future. And they're prioritizing right now, but discounting us, because every year we wait, every 2 years, every year, all we're doing is creating a larger problem, because these gases, they stay trapped in the atmosphere. So unless we suck them out, it's going to be a really huge problem. And so that's what I kind of want to, again, it's a very scary thought, but it is very much our future, and this is very much our reality. So it's always great to stay concerned and, really hold your politicians accountable, because yeah, it's our future. I'd just like to acknowledge some of my partners at UC Irvine. This research is funded by the NSF. And there are some mics there. I know we're running out of time for questions, but you can also pop a question into the Mentimeter as well. Thank you very much.
I have one question. Do you think that at some point, these lands or areas that are really close to the beach, as Miami or in Latin America or the north of Colombia, Venezuela maybe, are going to like disappear at some point, even if it is like 2, 3, 4 meters from the ocean line right now, like it's going to disappear at some point, even if it's in 80, 100, 150 years?
So again, it would depend on how high. You said up to 2 to 3 meters there. I think sea level rise, unfortunately, will be with us for a very long time. It will become inundated. It also depends on how we're willing to sort of transform society. If you look at the Netherlands, the whole place is underwater, really, right? But it's still a country. And because they made a commitment a long time ago to kind of reroute and push out all the water. But yes, sea level rise is a very slow moving process. And that's why, you know, we need to keep adapting really dynamically. It's not just, you know, a right now problem, even though it is, it's also a very long-term problem as well. And so, yeah, we will unfortunately be dealing with these impacts for quite a long time. And if we continue to do nothing, then even longer as well. And you know, the one thing I can say is it's really hard to get to stop ice from melting once it starts.
Hi, Nadia. I wanted to follow up with kind of the stuff you were talking about where people were having to move and the impact of like the woman where she was in higher levels. And I know when I met with you, we talked over the summer. One of the things that got me thinking was the articles in I believe the Washington Post talking about the ideas of gentrification. And while I know that's not the focus of your research, do you think that there's that risk of that happening as people are have to shift from a beach area, you know, to other areas, which will kind of distort and push people out from those affordable communities that they're in and make those places less affordable?
Yes, I absolutely do think that is a likely outcome. If you look at some of the county plans right now, the county, Miami-Dade County released this sort of sea level rise action strategy, and it contains 5 strategies for kind of transforming Miami, really kind of, when I say transform, I mean kind of making Miami more of a Venice, making it sort of live with water. And one of the strategies is sort of building on high ground. And so there are, you know, plans to kind of build on high ground at the moment for that sort of resilience. However, I would also say the county is, you know, very aware that there are a lot of researchers studying this issue and a lot of people advocating to make sure that those benefits also accrued, that you know, the people that are living there right now, that they can also still remain there as well. Again, I don't know how this will actually work in practice, but we are, you know, I hope that this is, it's not the central point of my research, but it is something that I hope to sort of bring out with the interviews as well. It is a big concern if, you know, things start to get really, really expensive in those areas. How are people going who've been living there for decades, how are they going to continue to live there? But I do agree, I think that there is, I think people are very much concerned about elevation at this point, yes. If you don't want to come up, you can also pop it into the Mentimeter and I'll see it as well.
I'll just ask, so I know you've moved with your studies and your work. Was part of the reason you're not in Miami is because of the climate change? Was that a factor for you?
No, not at all. I would so be in Miami if I could. My partner moved to London, and so I'm just here with him for now. And but I'm coming back in a few weeks, and I really can't wait. I mean, you know, I moved from New York, and over the course of 10 years, Miami became my home too. So this project is very much born out of love for Miami and wanting to see it, you know, be the beautiful place that it is.
It looks like there's no other questions unless you see more on the Mentimeter, but I do want to thank you very much, Nadia, for coming today virtually, but really a very enlightening discussion. I think it's very important and very informative. As I said, a little bit scary, I think, for some of us, but hopefully we can take that fear and use it to inspire action so we can hopefully avoid the worst of those scenarios and to try to be conscious of what our role is in trying to keep climate change from getting us and bringing the sea level up to those significant levels and try to reverse some of those trends. But I think it's been very important. I think your research is great. And I thank you very much for taking the time to be here. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming today and also watching on the live stream or when it's recorded, watching this lecture, and I hope you can get involved. If you are interested this week, we are doing another event. It's our Day on the Bay. And we have some information if you're here that you can sign up. Otherwise, it's our once a semester cleanup of the bay, where we clean up around the campus and try to reduce the waste. So if you're able to come this Saturday, I definitely encourage you. You can, if you're online and hearing this, you can go to go.fiu.edu/dayonthebay2021, or there's also information available online as well. So we encourage you to participate in that as well. It looks like one more question.
Sorry, Nadia, it's me again. Talking about COP26, do you really think that those objectives we set there, it's going to be reached? Because before we hear like objectives for 2030, and now they moved to 2050. But what's going to happen? Are we going to get better at some point? What do you think?
I mean, this is really a question of what I hope for versus like what I see. And what I hope for is, yeah, I absolutely hope that they find the will to stop discounting our future and realize that someone's going to have to deal with this, and we might as well deal with this right now. But unfortunately, there have been 2 reports that have shown, these papers are sort of coming out as we speak, that essentially have shown that the pathway to just keeping us at 1.5 degree of warming is not the pathway that we're on, even with those all the pledges that are being made at COP26. It's around the pledges that we're making for emissions reductions right now are basically going to keep us at around 2.5 or so degrees Celsius, which is not, again, where we want to be. We don't even want to be at 1.5, you know, and that also dooms a lot of island nations around the world. I mean, we're just talking about the coastal parts of Miami, but there are tons of island nations that would not be able to survive that sort of rise. And there are lots of places that are also preparing for that as well, buying land in other areas and trying to relocate their citizens. But so yes, to your question, at the moment, it's actually documented at this point that the pledges being made at COP26 are not sufficient to keep us at 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming.
Thank you again. So, you know, everyone, up to you to help try to contribute to making people aware so we can take action and make sure our leaders are aware. But that's part of the reason we're doing this series, is to try to emphasize the activities, environmental things you can do, and make you to improve resilience and to kind of come back strong from these difficult scenarios. Hopefully we can kind of beat that back, but it's clearly a tough road. And Nadia, thank you very much again for this informative lecture and being part of our lecture series.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you again for inviting me. Thank you to everyone who showed up in person. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. And thank you to everyone who joined via the live stream. It's really a pleasure to speak with you all.
If people have more questions about your work, are they able to reach out to you some way, by email or something?
Yes, they can. I should have included my email address. I'm so sorry. But you can just Google me, and I promise it's there somewhere.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone again for attending. Hope to see you on Day in the Bay and some of our future lectures. Have a good day.